Hello and welcome to Law Pod. I am Lauren Dempster. I'm a senior lecturer here in the School of Law at Queen's University Belfast and director of Law Pod. I am delighted to be joined today by two guests from Rainbow Refugees NI. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Niamh and I'm one of the founders and committee members of Rainbow Refugees.
Hello, my name is Tolu and I'm a member of Rainbow Refugees.
Great. Thank you, Tolu and Niamh, for joining us. So to begin with, could you tell us a bit about Rainbow Refugees?
Rainbow Refugees was established in 2022. A group of queer people, myself included, got together and decided that we wanted to create a safe space for LGBT plus asylum seekers and refugees to take part in Belfast Pride. So collectively, we put together an entry in Belfast Pride Parade, and we led with a very strong message that refugees were welcome in Belfast. We were conscious that there's a lot of anti-migrant and anti-refugee sentiment increasing in the UK over recent years. And we wanted to avoid that taking a foothold, particularly within the LGBT community here. So we led the Pride Parade that year, which was incredible. We had at that time about 10 members who came and joined us, and they marched wearing masks which had the flags of countries where they were criminalised. After that amazing event, we had a group of people then say, okay, what's next? And we'd never planned that this was going to be an ongoing thing. And then we realised that we needed to create a regular safe space for queer refugees to come together. So now we do monthly meetups with our members. The activities change all the time. It could be a day trip. Our next meetup is a sexual health workshop. And the plan is to go bigger and better next year at Pride during the summer.
Tolu, you mentioned that you are a member of Rainbow Refugees NI. Would you be willing to share some of your experience of seeking asylum?
Yes, okay. I want to say first that my experience is, I could describe it as atypical because I came through the student route. I arrived here to study at Queen's, and the plan wasn't at all to seek asylum. But that had to happen. That seemed to be the only choice for me at some point when I went home and the harassment had been receiving online extended to physical, and I was attacked and had to come back. And I graduated from Queen's and started a program in Ulster, and it didn't stop really. It went on for a long time, and eventually, after seeking help and advice from a couple of agencies, they were like, okay, this is the only option. And I remember holding back for about 3-4 months because I was reading up on it, and one of my fears was that the fact that my life would be disrupted immediately. And I was convinced that from what I saw online and even the experiences of people around me, I'll be taken into accommodation. And one of the things that I needed never to change is that my funding for my PhD would be seized. So I thought I wouldn't be allowed to study or work, which is the norm, like I said. At some point, my BRP changed from student to the ABR that they give refugees, and it was written there that I was not allowed to work. I had to fight that, and eventually it was changed back to allowed to work 20 hours. So basically, I was given the same condition of my existing student visa. But one big thing for me was the feeling of being stuck, because one of the things that I needed to prove each time was my, it's called the share code, something you have to go online and get to my employers. And I didn't have a share code for the period I applied because they made a mistake with my name and some logistics. A lot of things were going on. And then Ulster needed me to also submit my student visa. And that was the point. I was like, look, I'm awaiting decision. Right now, I'm neither a student nor anything. I'm just, and I remember feeling a lot of anxiety and stress and worry about how I was going to move on to the next stage in my life. I was going to earn money to work for myself, to fend for myself. I wasn't taken out of my accommodation, thankfully. I had a lawyer help, and put things right, my documentation right. As much as you would expect that I should be able to handle that, it's really tricky. So I can imagine the stress and worry of someone who doesn't even know the language, what they go through. Because my lawyer and I sat together, read all the websites and started thinking of the implication of everything, every step of the way. And the interview itself was so draining. I would say that was like the beginning of my full, like the past traumas that I thought I had put to bed or haven't remembered in a long time. I was asked questions that would make me walk back. It was like walking back through a portal to relieve all of those things and all of those moments. And there was no provision for support afterwards. It was just me let back into society. And I went into really deep depression for months. And then eventually my GP was like, okay, you need medication, and then I was put on waiting list for counselors. And, it's been almost 2 years now, but I'm getting better. Before I had like really bad days, 5 bad days in a week. And now, with support of friends, I must say, and even personal working on myself and doing the things that I used to do and love doing and I missed and, added to my issues. I'm also taking the medication. So it's a lot of help and support from everywhere, really. And feeling useful, feeling that there's something I have to give and offer. I'm better now, I'm much better. Mental health isn't a thing that is a state. No, it fluctuates. We know that. So there are days when you don't even feel like you want to get out of bed. And then some other days you can do anything, you can move any mountain, really, like you feel that way mentally. So I would say it's been really like uphill battle, being able to get away from that state of being an asylum seeker, even though I've been a refugee for almost 2 years now. There's still those moments where I feel, oh, I can't believe I can't go back home, like there's still that moment where I feel like I've not fully accepted what it means and what it feels like, because there's a lot of implication. Long-term planning for me is a luxury now, because there's this paper that tells me I will be here for the next XYZ years. And what happens to me then on depends on someone else. So I can't even make big plans like, oh, I want to maybe I'll get a mortgage on this house because I don't know if I'll be here in the next 4 or 5 years. So even long-term like relationships is it's something that I have been, trying to understand and tell whoever I'm with at the time that, look, I don't know where I'll be going next. And it's also a very interesting subject because they don't meet you on that level. They meet you as a person and then they find out that you're a refugee and they're like, you don't know how it will swing, really. So it affects every part of your life. That's what I'm trying to say. That even though it's one dimension of who you are, you can feel it, the impact in everything that you do.
Thank you for sharing that, Tolu. It feels just so fundamentally wrong that people who are trying to escape from harm are then put through this process that is so full of harm in itself. And I'm glad that you're doing a bit better now and that you have support here. Niamh mentioned the growing anti-refugee sentiment that we're seeing in the UK. Could you set the scene for our listeners, perhaps those who aren't familiar with kind of the legal landscape around refugees coming to the UK? Could you just say a bit more about, I guess, the legal and political landscape for LGBTQ+ refugees and asylum seekers?
All right, thank you very much. Well, right now, something very recent is the Rwanda threats to send refugees to Rwanda. And although that has been kicked against by many human rights organizations and even individuals are not happy about that, that seems to be what the lawmakers want to happen. And they keep pushing that. So that's one. There's also the rise of the far right that would look for any reason, really, to blame refugees or immigrants generally for every problem under the sun. So very importantly is also the lack of safe routes, because there's this, conversation around illegal entry. Well, how do you want people who are literally fleeing from their lives suddenly to find a way to come in legally if there are no safe routes? currently there's no visa for refugees. So if you go on the website, the gov.uk website, you can't actually find anything to click on and say, this is why I'm coming to the UK and this is the reason for it. There's all kinds of visas there, but there's no refugee visa. Also, it's very difficult for LGBT refugees in particular to prove to the Home Office when they've been interviewed questions around their sexuality. And if that's the reason why you're fleeing your country, that's literally the thing that you need to answer questions about. This is something you've spent your whole life hiding. You've probably gained a master's degree in pretending, and you somehow got outed in your country, or something happened to you and you needed to flee. So having to come here and answer questions, suddenly put on the spot and provide proof and evidence of that is a huge, huge issue that a lot of people struggle with. I know I struggled with, and it still bothered me and affected my mental health for a long time. So, and there's also lack of, awareness of refugee problems or challenges by the general population, really. There's this singular narrative around, refugees or immigrants are bottom feeders, or they're trying to use resources, and that's where it ends. There isn't a balanced view of their humanity. These are humans, first off. These are people with lives in their countries. No one woke up and decided, you know what, I'm going to become stateless. I'm going to run away and become this person who is neither here nor there. So there's all that, hostile environment that is like trickling down really from the politicians and the Home Office as well. And this would be something that I hope with avenues like this, people can understand more about the issues and be open to at least a conversation around it.
Niamh, were you wanting to come in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that at the minute, we know that the UK government are trying to shirk their international law responsibilities when it comes to refugees and asylum seekers. So the Illegal Migration Act is essentially trying to eradicate the right to claim asylum. Offshore are, internationally held responsibilities for refugees. And there's a concern that there's a potential domino effect there, that if the UK sends their asylum seekers to Rwanda, then all these other countries will start to consider if they can do the same. And the kind of foundation then that international law and human rights is founded on starts to crumble. And that's a threat, to us all. I think, people have said in the past, watch how the government treat refugees, because that's how they would treat you if they could get away with it. And we know that the government is trying to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, for example, and they're using the migrant, in bunny ears, the migrant crisis as an excuse to do that. But if they do withdraw from ECHR, it has really huge potential implications for all of us, actually. So it's very, very worrying how particular groups are being scapegoated. In a sinister way, they're using xenophobia and racism and Islamophobia to ostracize people who need our help.
Yeah, thanks, Niamh. I would agree for sure. I think sometimes the refugee issue is one where people find it easy to other. It's like, I will never be in that position. But as you say, when freedoms are narrowed or limited in one way, it's only a matter of time before it affects everyone. So thank you both for setting the scene in terms of the UK picture. In terms of Northern Ireland, more specifically then, what issues are faced by LGBTQ plus refugees here?
There's a plethora of them, really, challenges and barriers to reaching your full potential, should I say that? Because it's one thing to apply and then become a refugee and then find usefulness for yourself in the new place that you have. So one big thing would be information, like having, I wouldn't even say orientation pack on the website that is directly and tailored for you. Because what you don't know can harm you. What you don't know that you don't know can turn around and become so massive in your life, and you wish you knew it on time. There are certain things that you need to apply for, and there's a window for it. And if you miss it, you have to wait for the next year or the next cycle. So, for instance, people whose professional certificates can be used here until they write a certain exam, for instance, and you have this exam once a year. For instance, you have the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. You have to apply in January, and once you don't do that, you have to wait till the next January. And that happened to me for so many years. Even the year that I was ready to do it, I'd started my master's at the time, and I thought, I can't combine this. Till now, I've just been pushing it because the time hasn't been right. But when I first started this journey, there was a window I had that I thought I could use this. But this is like just one issue. And there are many others like accommodation, like health, knowing how to connect everything document-wise in a manner that it doesn't fall back to you as your duty. I don't know how to put this, but like compared to where I was raised, there's a lot of paperwork in government that is not necessarily interconnected. So you go to this agency and you have to refer to this. It's like a ping pong, really. You have to be referred to this agency and back again and back again. And it's because you didn't have a document that one was supposed to give you, but this depends on the other one. So a very good one is the bank needing accommodation, and then your agencies that will rent house to you asking for 6 months bank statement. I'm like, that doesn't even make sense. I just arrived. I can't have any of these things you're asking me for. So I suppose that those are the challenges for everyone new to the system, really, but more so for someone who is in limbo and has just gone through this process that made them rethink a lot of things and restart their life, like pressing a restart button at a stage in your life where you didn't expect to. So it's difficult to even overcome that mentally and then even in reality. Like I said, you now fall back on the messes of whatever social contacts you've been able to grow, or your friends or your colleagues or students. I had to like moonlight for about 3 days in different places when I needed to change accommodation suddenly. So those are just like a few issues. And
So obviously I'm not a refugee and I haven't been through the refugee process. I do work with refugees and we've started this group, and I've heard a lot of stories anecdotally from a lot of refugees, but in particular LGBTQ+ refugees. So just to set the context, queer people are criminalised in 65 jurisdictions globally and can face the death penalty in 12 countries around the world. So what happens is when someone decides that their life is in danger and they need to leave their home country, which nobody ever wants to do, they come to a place and they bring all of their fear with them about speaking to authorities, about being open to doctors or nurses, about something that's related to their sexual orientation. They hide that. They potentially have poor health outcomes because they don't trust the system. People don't trust interpreters because very often interpreters come from their own countries and they carry along with them some of the prejudices that they've sought to escape from. Or an interpreter might also be the person that you see on Friday at mosque. So you're not going to be open about who you are in front of that person. So there's a lot of issues with disclosure. And I think for LGBTQ+ refugees, the situation it's quite different to other refugee groups. So I always sort of think if I were an Iranian woman fleeing the totalitarian Islamic regime where women are forced to wear a hijab, and I decided that I didn't want to do that, I could come to the UK and claim asylum and I would not have to wear that hijab. I would, on day one, have gained that level of freedom that I wanted. For LGBTQ+ refugees, they don't get that freedom on day one because of the nature of the Home Office and the asylum system. They're often living in accommodation with people who come from their home countries, who come from their home cultures and religions, who have maybe persecuted them in the past. So actually their persecution and their need to hide themselves continues, unfortunately. And that's why groups like Rainbow Refugees are so important for people to meet. We've had, I'm not going to mention which nationality, but we've recently had 4 people from the same country arrive in our group, and each one of them said, I've never met another LGBTQ+ person from my home country, and now there are 4 of them, standing in a corner having a conversation together. And that's just magic, to create that, because they're not seeing that freedom outside of those spaces just yet.
I guess one of the things I was reflecting on, so I became aware of Rainbow Refugees and I's existence about 6 months ago. You had a karaoke fundraiser in the Sunflower, and myself and some colleagues went, and I found myself thinking about homophobia in Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland being kind of quite a conservative society in many ways. And I guess in terms of the intersection of homophobia and racism, I mean, Would you want to reflect a bit on how that manifests here?
So I'm not a person of colour, so I can't speak about the experience of racism on a personal level. But a lot of our members do talk about homophobic, transphobic, biphobic abuse that they suffer. But they're also walking around with multiple identities. So it might be a hijabi woman who is a Muslim and is also queer, but she might get, racial Islamophobic abuse in the street. Or it could be a person of colour who's getting racist abuse, but they're also LGBT, or they're also a woman, or they're also a survivor of sexual violence. So, we all have these intersecting identities, but this is another layer for members of Rainbow Refugees. They are, and we always say they're a minority within a minority, because, people of colour in Northern Ireland, refugees, asylum seekers are minorities. And within that, we have the LGBT people, but also within the mainstream LGBT community, people of colour are minorities and refugees are minorities. So they can kind of be invisible in both ways. And I always sort of tell the story about our first Pride. There was a member who had come to our workshops and he had created a mask from his home country. We were very chill about whether people wanted to do it or not on the day. And we said, look, if you don't want to do it, just let us know, that's fine. And on the day, he told me he didn't want to march in Pride and he didn't want to wear the mask. And he said, is that okay? Of course it's okay. I said, if you don't want people, to know that you're gay, that's up to you. And he said, no. I don't want the gay people to know that I'm a refugee. And that was like a penny drop moment for me because, he'd gone out and he'd made friends on the local gay scene here, and very attractive young man. People, took notice of him and people knew him, but he didn't want them to know that he was a refugee because of all of those intersecting prejudices that we have.
Thank you, Niamh.
I can relate to that, actually. I often find myself changing from one hat to another, depending on the environment I'm in. And I recently reclaimed that word immigrant because that's who I am. And at least in this context, because it carries a lot of negative, again, connotations. And there's a way the eyes change. When someone looking at you, you tell them you're a refugee, you can just see the shift in your eyes. Yes. And then I would feel this need to say more because I'm more than that. But now I've stopped, really. If I'm in an event where it's for refugees, that's what I am that day. If I'm in an event for researchers, and then I say, okay, I'm in a PhD research. I don't have to say more to prove to you or to make you comfortable enough to have a conversation with me. But a lot of times you go out to which is wonderful, the gay clubs, and you just want to be a person. You don't want to go there and you're a refugee because then, I don't know, something changes. There's just this shift. And I don't know if it has to do with Northern Ireland specifically not being used to outsiders. And because I noticed that, because it's been an either or for a long time, two major groups. So every other person outside of those groups will feel a certain form of otherness, I don't know, being given to them, or racism. So I can't tell, really. Like you said, it's a very, not confusing, but overlapping situation where being female, being gay, being very dark, not just, because I've seen situations where my friend who is lighter, much lighter, but very African, gets treated differently. Mm-hmm. And so that's a new dimension of something I'm experiencing here. And remember that when I arrived, I'd always lived in Nigeria all my life, so I never felt black. I began to feel black here. Began to understand what feeling black felt like. And at the same time, feeling like a refugee. And I was like, okay, whatever. But they're good people. I've been a recipient of so much kindness that I can't even imagine that could happen. And that just reinforces my conviction in humanity and also in people in Northern Ireland, that they're good people. And if given a chance, or at least been exposed to enough information from the right source, not from your politicians, then I'll be happy here. I am really enjoying the queer scene and making friends with people who are queer and look like me. because it's different. Sometimes I miss people from Africa and I'm in my mood to interact with them, but then I have to immediately become less queer because, again, that's something, like she said, is typical to our society. On the odd chance you find someone who is doesn't really care or is queer yourself, you're like, you hold on to them and you're like, no way. It's a good feeling, really good feeling. So, yeah, that's what I can really say about. The humans are not necessarily good because they're queer. I need to point out that sometimes we receive that bit of distance from queer environments. But rainbow refugees, I remember the first day I walked in, I remember feeling that I didn't need to do anything. I don't know how to explain that, but I didn't need to be anything or do anything. I just needed to chill, and it's always been that environment for us, really. That's my to-go place if I ever want to feel happy and relaxed, 100% relaxed.
Thank you, Tolu, for sharing your experience, and we'll add into the show notes some information on where our listeners can look up more about Rainbow Refugees for anyone who wants to connect or support the organisation. Niamh, you previously briefly mentioned the experience in asylum seeker accommodation, but I know currently you're working on a report exploring homophobia in asylum seeker accommodation. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
So we, as Rainbow Refugees, started to notice trends within the people who were coming to our group and the things that they were asking for help with. And a lot of it was to do with hate crime and issues within the accommodation that they lived in. So we decided to conduct a survey last summer, and we surveyed our members. At that stage, we had about 25 people responded to the survey. Our membership has doubled now to 50 people within a year. So that gives you an idea of the scale of how busy we are as a little voluntary project outside of work. And the results of the survey were so depressing. We found that 78% of people surveyed experienced abuse and harassment from other refugees and asylum seekers. For almost 80% of those, that abuse happened within the accommodation that's provided to them by the Home Office. This is the Home Office who have a duty to keep people safe. So when an asylum seeker comes and asks the Home Office to provide accommodation, it's provided on a no-choice basis. And very often, it's men are put with men and women are put with women. And for some people, that's really, really uncomfortable because of how they present when they're just being themselves. So attacks are high, name calling is high, abuse is high. There's been sexual and physical violence against our members. And we decided that we would work with the Law Centre, NI, they have the Migration Justice Project. And we decided to dig into the policy here and look at the safeguarding responsibilities that Mayor's accommodation have, that the Home Office have, Migrant Help. These are all the agencies involved with asylum seekers. And at the minute, we're picking through that policy to understand who ultimately has responsibility, not just to respond when harm happens, but to proactively prevent harm from happening in the first place. So we also asked in the survey about people's experience of mental health, and I don't think you'll be surprised, refugees generally, mental health is not great, and as well LGBTQ plus community, the general community has high rates of mental health difficulties. And when you combine those two, as you said, intersecting identities, we get incredibly high rates of suicide ideation and self-harm. A lot of our members are receiving medical support for their mental health, counselling, and a lot of that could be because of the experiences they've had in their home country, their journeys here, and then when they get here, they're still no longer safe. So we're hoping to publish the report within the next couple of months with a series of recommendations for the Home Office, for mayors, for Migrant Help. We also have recommendations for the Northern Ireland Executive Office. So, for example, Northern Ireland has been waiting for, I think, 19 years for a refugee integration strategy that still doesn't exist. We have it in draft form, and we want them to include the needs of LGBTQ plus refugees in that refugee integration strategy. At the same time, we don't have a sexual orientation strategy in Northern Ireland either, and we'll be pressing them to include the needs of refugees in the LGBT sexual orientation strategy. So we've been working with organisations in GB as well who are working in this, queer asylum and refugee sector, like Rainbow Migration, Micro Rainbow, We've been working with refugees at home, and our main recommendation out of this is that the Home Office should be providing separate, safe accommodation for asylum seekers. So when someone arrives and they claim asylum, they're not being put into a hotel with, 50 other men who come from similar cultures and countries where they could be at risk. We're asking that they dedicate a couple of houses within the Mayor's asylum estate in Belfast, and allocate that as a queer house, a queer woman house, or a queer man, or a queer trans house. And we think that will massively reduce stress. We think that it will massively reduce instances of abuse that then state agencies have to respond to and spend resources on. So yeah, we're very excited about the report. It is depressing. It's going to be quite shocking to a lot of people when they see the numbers coming out of it, but it's too important not to do this piece of work.
For sure. Thank you, Niamh. Would you like to say anything for our listeners about how they can help in terms of either supporting rainbow refugees or more broadly trying to address some of the issues that we've covered?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of sort of top-down things that could be done. So on a very, very basic fundamental level, we need people to challenge anti-migrant rhetoric when they hear it. We need people to challenge racism and consider how they can just influence the tiny little space that they occupy and make it better. And if all those little spaces add up, then it'll be a much better world. So that's a very basic and fundamental thing. I think that, for Queen's Law students in particular, a career in immigration, we don't have enough immigration lawyers. We don't have enough lawyers fighting back against the Home Office because they've been vilified in the media or because legal aid rates haven't been particularly favourable to immigration. So yeah, consider volunteering in immigration, consider, studying and taking a job in immigration. Something else you could do is homework clubs for kids, refugee kids, or digital access. A lot of, as Tolu says, a lot of people, have a lot of systems to navigate and they don't have a computer and they don't have internet, or maybe they're not digitally literate. So anything at all that helps unlock doors for people, and Queen's students, I imagine, could do something really, really creative and really impactful if they put their minds to it. There's two more things that I think that you could do. So STAR is Student Action for Refugees, and it's a UK-wide organisation, I suppose, with different chapters. Now, Belfast did have a chapter of STAR, Student Action for Refugees, but it no longer exists, sadly. So STAR were instrumental in Queen's granting a number of bursaries to asylum seekers over the years, and now Ulster University have followed as well. And STAR did so much work on that, and sadly STAR now in Belfast is dormant. So please start up STAR again. Please get, students standing up for refugees, not just inside the university, but outside. And then my final point really is for students to lobby Queen's, really, to end their contract with Corporate Travel Management, so CTM, who run all of Queen's travel services. They are the managers of the infamous Bibi Stockholm asylum barge, which you'll all have heard so much about in the media. They have a £1.6 billion contract to provide overcrowded, unsafe, offshore accommodation for a so-called accommodation for asylum seekers. There have been Legionella outbreaks. The Fire Brigade Union don't believe that putting twice as many people in a bedroom is safe for health and safety reasons. And we also had Leonard Faruqi take his own life recently on the Bibi Stockholm. So, we would love to see students lobbying Queen's to stand up for their ethical procurement policies and end the contract with CTM, because student fees are, the fees that your students are paying are actively going in profit into the pockets of CTM. So, that's a very bottom up, a number of things that people could do there.
Thanks, Niamh. And I would echo that call for our students to lobby university management. So I guess for our listeners to be aware, several of the staff unions at Queen's, including UCU and NIPSA, have written to university management and asked them to reconsider the contract with CTM and to look at their procurement policies more generally. But the student voice is so powerful. So yeah, I really hope students write to the VC about their concerns about CTM. Before we finish, Tolu, do you want to share a little bit about where our listeners can find out more information about Rainbow Refugees NI?
So we're on all the social media accounts, basically Instagram, Facebook as Rainbow Refugees NI. So you can miss it if you put that. It's also on Twitter. And very soon we're going to be launching a brand new website where you can find more information on how to reach us and to support us.
That's great. Thank you both very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.